Happy Tuesday and welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice with Jamaicans for Justice team. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
So I'm not in the best of physical shape. I'm a little ill.
Whoa, you went and got ill for the holiday?
I felt ill last night, just the day before returning to work. Okay. But my holiday was pretty good. I trust yours as well?
Yes, it was.
Okay, great. And for those who celebrate from a religious perspective or others who benefit from the holiday season, I trust you had a very good few days off from work or a very good restful time with the family. I saw a little tweet making fun of how the connection between bun and cheese and fish with the religious aspect of Easter.
Yes. And you know what's funny? I saw some bun and cheese items that I would never expect to see.
I think only one of them was real, though. I think yesterday was April's Fool.
No, but I physically saw two. A bun and cheese ice cream from Devon House.
You had it?
I tried a smidge. I can't give a review on air.
I heard very good feedback on it. I haven't had it though.
Oh, okay.
But yes, already. Oh, what was the other item?
It was a donut.
Oh, from Oh, I thought that was April's Fool.
No, that was a real thing.
It was a real thing.
Yeah.
Oh my. Okay. All right, but I trust we all had the benefit of spending time with family and friends and just relaxing. So for this week, we're talking on a topic of police reform, and we're going to be following up on that discussion with some item coming out of the news cycle the previous week, just so we can have a sense of where we're going with this particular item for discussion. And it's something that JFJ, we have been advocating for years now, and we're going to be joined by Mr. Horace Levy, who is a former Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice, social justice advocate. We were due to be joined by Professor Anthony Clayton, but unfortunately, due to some personal emergencies, he has extended his apology. And we will have Professor Clayton with us on another occasion.
Yes, he was very eager to join, so it's unfortunate as well.
Yeah. All right. The news cycle that was. So there are several items, and some of them I want us, Jay, to have a discussion on, because I saw some things coming up on our social media pages as to why we're speaking on particular issues. But there are two things I want us to quickly speak about. Last week, we heard about the Auditor General's report, and we will touch on that towards the end of the program. But I just want to briefly mention the content of that report, because we saw the headline, for example, that some $370 million were expended towards the rental of a property that was not utilized, and that rent was paid over the period of 3 years. I won't speak to anything in the media space regarding who owns the property, because I think it has no relevance if it is that there is nothing that suggested that the Member of Parliament acted untoward in any way. But the reason cited for those funds being expended, $370 million, near 400 million Jamaican dollars, was procurement challenges. Now, we work with the ministry, through the Ministry of Health, so we're quite aware of some of the hurdles that you must overcome with the procurement within the government. But I'm sorry, I don't think procurement challenges is an excuse for expending that much money over such an extended period of time. We know the challenges, but at what point do we realize that such administrative and financial wastage, monies that could have otherwise gone towards purchasing of hospital beds, much needed social services programs, educational programs. You have so many schools now. When you look at, for example, the heat, we were just driving in traffic and we were burning up.
Yes.
Yeah? And you have schools without fans. You talk about some of the nutritional program in schools that need improvement, and the PATH program itself that needs overhaul.
The retrofitting of some of the school facilities for accessibility in accordance with the Disabilities Act.
Exactly. And you're going to be citing procurement challenges. It's laughable that it's so offensive, actually. And at
Yes.
one point, do we hold public servants accountable when there is such wasting of our tax money? At what point? So when we ask for things, a lot of the times you hear that we can't afford it. But you look at items such as these and you ask yourself the question, what is affordability when wastage and corruption is so high in this country? Not good enough. But I do urge our members of parliament to knock heads and fix this procurement issue. We've heard the need for some revision, but until that day comes, the technical leaders across the ministries do better. Do better. It's important. Just to quickly say that there was a news item, not sure if you saw the article from the Jamaica Gleaner, Laverne Wright, followed up on that, where a man was held for 42 years. Apparently he has schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1982, on October 13, 1982, when he was detained at the Governor General's pleasure, he was deemed unfit to plead.
Mm-hmm.
42 years without a trial. He was temporarily placed within the care of his family under some strict conditions, Mr. Wright of the Jamaica Gleaner writes. And it brings home to light that you still have hundreds of mentally ill persons still detained at the Governor General's pleasure and the court's pleasure. No trial whatsoever. And there is no sense of how things are progressing with that hundreds. So we saw in the Gleaner article that Diane Watson, the head of the Legal Aid Council, filed an application to the Supreme Court, and it was so granted for this gentleman to be released. And the article said some 13 other cases are pending review from the Supreme Court to have those family members released. But what I would say to the Legal Aid Council and certainly the Ministry of Justice, who I think is a part of this charge, is to say to the public how many mentally ill persons you have still detained at the Governor General's pleasure, the status of having them transition to the court's pleasure, having their day in court. What is the status of that? Because what we don't want is a piecemeal approach happening. And though we laud the effort of Legal Aid Council and the Director of Public Prosecution who is assisting in this matter, I think a more comprehensive review and report is needed from the state as to the status of those who are mentally ill, who have been detained, and who have not seen their day in court.
Agreed.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right, over to you, Jane.
All right. So, on a lighter note from the last point, we're going to be doing our Did You Know and our trivia for today. Now, we did say we're talking about human rights policing today, and so we have themed both items accordingly. This item comes from the police service regulations, where we talk about discipline at Regulation 31. And it states that in cases where members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, where disciplinary cases where members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force or the Commission considers reports, if the Commission believes that the disciplinary action should be taken against an inspector or a higher ranking member, it can advise the Governor General, and for members lower than that lower than that rank, then the disciplinary measure can be taken by the Commissioner. And essentially what this is stating is that where a report has been made to the Police Service Commission on a member of the JCF, if that member of the JCF is below the rank of inspector, then the Commission is able to take whatever action it recommends in that case. Or did you know, for my, or trivia question, my bad, for today is, according to the Constitution, what is the maximum number of members the Police Service Commission can have? So if you know your Constitution, you'll be able to answer this quickly and efficiently on our Instagram pages or at 2397583.
All right. Oh, by the way, we should have announced before that the Bridge 99, the website is down still. And that means that we're not live streaming. So I know some of you are on Radioland for those who maybe, I think we maybe need to put something on our social media pages to let individuals know that we are still recording. You won't be able to watch us live via YouTube, but we're still recording. And at the end of the day, hopefully, or tomorrow, we should be able to put up the recording of today's program.
Yes.
All right. So we are discussing the matter of human rights policing. And if you remember, we we said our goodbyes to Major Anthony Anderson, and we welcome Dr. Blake as the new police commissioner. And JFJ, we had issued a police, not a police statement, a press statement, welcoming the new police commissioner and asking for the commissioner to make among his legacy the matter of reforming the police force, continuing that transformation. And we had some items that we had put forward that we hoped will be actioned by Dr. Blake. But before we get into that, we have seen some promises, Jade, for several years. I will turn over to you to just lead.
Sure. So since about 2018, we've heard from Minister of National Security, the Honorable Dr. Horace Chang, that there was an intention to create new legislation for the police service that was the purpose of which was to ensure that there would be constitutional protection to the Police Service Commission, but also to ensure that there was a robust, and this is a quote from the minister, a robust accountability framework, enhanced capacity building, culture change, and improvements in the standard of service delivery within the JCF.
No, there are several items, and by the way, this particular item, the Police Service Act, was a part of an IMF agreement that we had for several years that was promised to replace the Jamaica Constabulary Force Act. And for those of us who know a little bit of our history, remember now that the Jamaica Constabulary Force came to be following the Morant Bay Rebellion, and we have seen where that paramilitary approach has been utilized to neutralize civil unrest. Let me use that word. Very strong policing that worked against the citizens. If you look at the 1930s labor riots, the 1963 Coral Garden injustice, and so on, we have seen where the police have not acted in a manner that worked with citizens, but worked in a very strong arm approach. We have also talked about, this is from the state now, the National Security Council Act that will provide for establishment in law of a National Security Council. And there was also the merger of the Police Services Commission and the Police Civilian Oversight Authority to ensure that there is that kind of strong oversight body responsible for the monitoring and evaluation of the performance of the police. So several things have been discussed over the years, and we are joined by Mr. Horace Levy, but we're going to take a break and then we pick up to discuss some of these proposals in short order. Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We are discussing the matter of human rights policing and the continuation of the reforming of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Mr. Levy?
Hello.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you always. And I said to our listeners earlier that Mr. Levy is a former executive director of JFJ and still a JFJ family member. Right, Mr. Levy?
Right, you are.
All right, great. So you have been a part of this discussion for several years now, advocating for some of these things. And I tell you, Mr. Levy, there is a report that I was charged to read when I started at JFJ, the Wolf Report. And there's
Yes.
several items here that I'm sure will come up back in the conversation as we're going to delve into the issues around what are some of the areas of reform that we should be looking at. So just over to you, just to lay the framework or the background, the context for our listeners so they understand what we mean by human rights policing and what that entails if we're talking about reforming the JCF.
Yes, that man by the name of Wolf was Chief Justice Leslie Wolf.
Yes.
And that was back in 1992-93. A commission, a task force initially became a commission later perhaps, set up by Prime Minister P.J. Patterson. And that, to my knowledge, is the earliest serious call for reform of the police, though, in fact, the Crime Prevention Act, which Mr. Manley had put in force in 1974, had to be repealed about that same time as being against the Constitution. because that act gave the police leeway and so on to act in a way which was really contrary to human rights. And so it had to be repealed. And so it was about the same time that P.J. Patterson, the Prime Minister, did something that no previous Prime Minister and no later one has ever done, really, which was to put in place a committee made up of academics, civil society, and lawyers. In other words, not just turning to the police force to say, what we're going to know.
Yes.
Right? So it's important to bear this in mind. That, and in two subsequent national committees that Mr. Patterson also set up, 1996 and 2002, the same conclusion came out of all of those three, that two things are needed: the upliftment of the communities and reform of the police force. And this was repeated again in the West Kingston Commission of Inquiry.
Yes.
In their report, which came out in 2016, right? They said exactly the same thing, right? Reform of the police and upliftment of deprived communities, take them out of their deprivation. So the reform of the police is something that's been on the table a long time, and unfortunately, there have been some reforms in the last few years. Let me say that outright. Not everything is dark by any means. Technologically, Mr. Anderson, who's just gone out, Anthony Anderson, did a lot in that regard. So there are some pluses to be given to the police force. They disbanded a particular unit which was responsible for some of the cold-blooded killings in Tivoli. Yes. After the army and the police were able to enter Tivoli, there were some killings there committed by the police, and in particular this unit. That unit has been disbanded as a result, though it took several years for it to take place.
And no one individual was ever held responsible, eh?
No, though, if you read the report very carefully, especially I think it's section 16 or 15, they only refrained from giving the sharpest criticism to the then commissioner of police because he had already retired.
Yes.
Right? So, and several other officers who had not retired were very sharply criticized as well. So the reform of the police has been on the table a long time. And as I say, some steps have been taken, but many others. For example, why is it that Commissioner Anderson never took steps to really enforce the police on operations wearing their cameras? Why is it that Indicom is still now having to call for that to take place? It must be at least a decade, if not more, since, because I remember in the Violence Prevention Alliance, when in fact it was a civil society body,
yes,
and a particular individual who brought forward the whole idea of body-worn cameras. And then it just lapsed into silence. After that, nothing was done. And it's still not being enforced.
And Mr. Levy, just to add to our listeners, we've seen several announcements coming from when Peter Bunting was Minister of National Security, that more body-worn cameras have been procured. And you've seen the announcement coming into Dr. Horace Chang's leadership, body-worn cameras procured, more to be shipped into the island. But to date, and I stand corrected, I'm not sure if you've seen any of those guidelines, and certainly from Indicom's perspective, we've only seen where one incident had some footage that was shared with Indicom, and that was just sincere. I think June, I believe. So one, we're not sure of what the guidelines dictate, and secondly, we've not been seeing where any footage has been turned over really to any significant degree to Indicom. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts from that perspective.
I haven't seen anything either. As usual, there's a lot of talk about, but there is no enforcement. The high command in the police force is not obligating the rank and file members going out on operations to actually wear these cameras, to carry them and to use them. I have seen no enforcement action at all. And without that enforcement, the rest is just talk.
Yes.
They may talk about legislation too. But, again, legislation without implementation is just, again, an empty shell.
Yes. And to our listeners, just to indicate that what we're saying here is not to, because sometimes this is a criticism that we're getting, that when we ask for these things to be made public, we're somehow undermining national security. In other jurisdictions, these protocols, guidelines are public. When there is a killing involving any police officers, for example, the footage is actually made public. There's a press conference within 24 to 48 hours, depending on the state. And all of these things are made public. So what we're asking for will not compromise any situation. This is from a place of accountability.
And it actually helps the police very often, protects them against false allegations. So it is not a one-sided thing by any means. The footage that comes out doesn't necessarily support the contention of those who are involved in the incident. It may in fact support what the police are saying and frees them from any culpability. So it's something that works for justice, for the benefit of anybody, whether it is the policeman or whether it is the citizen who has had his or her rights attacked and abused.
Mr. Levy, you said earlier, and we agree because we did our reading, that these thoughts about having some fulsome reform for the JCF is a long time coming. However, if we look at that discussion versus where we are now in our legislative and policy landscape, we have seen an increase in the number of mandatory minimum sentences. We have seen an increase in the power that the police has under the Bail Act. We've seen the implementation of emergency powers afforded to the police on a semi-regular basis since 2018. So looking at all of those actions that we've taken and then statements that say that we want to see reform in the police force, even coming from our national security minister, how do those two come together? Or are they a dichotomy?
They don't come together very well. The fact is that one of the things that, for example, the legal fraternity is very strongly against is certain elements in the Bail Act, which will allow the police to detain a person, to have bail refused until the police have had a chance to investigate the case. Because as the legal fraternity will tell you, many lawyers involved in criminal cases, all too often, what happens is that the person against whom the allegations are made are kept in detention for long periods while the police are investigating. What the police must do is really complete their investigations, carry them out more thoroughly. And in fact, a certain amount of that has been going on. And we've seen cases being brought before the courts much more rapidly now than was the case, let's say, even 2 years or a year ago by the police. Brought to the courts and concluded and convictions obtained. So it is not out of the reach of the police force to do the very thing that is really needed, which is to carry out the investigation before they make the charge, and not to keep somebody in detention for long periods awaiting the conclusion of an investigation. So that's one area which is still not finalized as far as I know. Perhaps you know better, being closer to the lawyers than I am.
Yes, well, the Bail Act was passed, so it is in place now with pre-charge provisions and additional powers given to police officers to determine whether or not a person can be on bail, including pre-charge bail.
So the pre-charge allows them to prevent bail from being given?
Well, it allows you to be detained or placed on bail conditions pending an investigation. So,
but what are those conditions?
The same bail conditions that you would normally be placed on had you been charged.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Levy, just stay with us. We're up on the break, but I want to pick up with conversations around citizen engagement and, for example, the community safety and security branch and some other areas. Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We're discussing the matter of human rights policing and reforming the Jamaica Constabulary Force. And we've seen some improvements over the years. We're joined by Horace Levy, social justice advocate, and I have to reiterate, former executive director of JFJ. Before we went on break, Mr. Levy, I wanted us to pick up on the conversation around citizen engagement. Certainly, we've seen several videos emerging on social media that are quite troubling for us here, and I know you would share these concerns, where you don't see the best of relationship between the police force and our citizens, especially in certain marginalized communities, that one would think that sort of relationship would be quite important with the police to get information and so on. So just to indicate to us a little bit of history, if you will, around the community safety and security branch, how you see those programs working and how those types of initiatives can be improved.
Well, the history, very briefly, is that after the Wolf Commission, within 3 or 4 years, the mid-1990s, the police force brought in community policing, they called it, right? And it was a good move. But unfortunately, it was scorned by the existing police force. And so it never really struck solid ground and got a firm footing in the police force. In the early 2000s. Later on, I think it was reinforced. And so there has been a strengthening of that branch of the police force. And I am told it's functioning at a much better level now. I'm not on the ground, you see, so I have to go on what I'm told.
Yes.
I mean, I'm told, for example, that the training at Twickenham Park is considerably improved, and that to some extent they have been able to overcome the difficulty of the young persons coming out full of the training on human rights and so on, only to have that thrust back into their faces by some of the established police out there and the practices that they carry out. And the result is that you still get a number, that number of confrontations you talked about, and the number of fatalities at the hands of police that Indicom is constantly having to investigate. So the scene is a very mixed picture. It very much depends on the particular community the confrontation you talked about in one community, which can be replicated in a number of others, on the other hand, is not universal, I should say. There are some communities where there are good relations between the police and the community.
Yes.
And how do you get that as the rule all around? I'm not sure.
Yeah. And just to add to that, while we mentioned the Community Safety and Security Branch, the police, I believe, they have done considerable improvement rather, in having that community-based approach with other areas. And I think the one I want to point out, Mr. Levy, is the establishment of the domestic violence intervention centers across the island, which is important to respond to domestic violence in a way that both men and women feel comfortable enough to report. And we've seen where there have been some significant improvement in the number of persons coming forward.
Yes, that's been a very positive step. You're quite right.
Yeah. But one of
and another positive one, which is going forward at the present time, is to provide the police with training in how to deal with the mentally ill.
Yes.
That's also a very important forward step. But sorry, you're going to say something.
Well, you triggered another thing. You mentioned the mentally ill, but also one of the major gaps we've seen in our work responding to gender-based violence is that we've worked with members of the disabled community, especially the hearing impaired. And when they go to make reports, there are no sign language interpreters, for example. The police isn't trained and equipped to respond. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with anything else along that line in terms of the police having the capacity to respond to the needs of the vulnerable populations, if that is an area that you would also add some comment to.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to add anything there. I'm not au fait. I'm not up to date on what's happening there.
Okay. Another thing from me, Mr. Levy, and Jay touched on it earlier. When we have the police having more powers and we see some of the increased confrontation with the citizens, I'm not sure if that basically contradicts the community policing effort and what recommendations you could make there, especially from your experience working with the violence interrupters and so on. What recommendations could you make to enhance the community policing efforts within the JCF?
Well, one of the things that stands out about the work of the peace management initiatives, the PMI, while I was there and involved, and after I had left, because I resigned from it in 2019. But one of the things that was the features of our work was that we worked alongside the police. We kept a distance from them. We had to, in order to win the trust of the young men, the boys very often, who were responsible for some of the violence. So to win that trust, we kept a certain distance from the police. We never carried any information to the police, that's for sure. And we avoided direct collaboration with the police. But we worked alongside them in the sense that the police could do their work while we did our work. And so there was no hostility between us and the police, none at all. We were glad to have the police deal with some of the serious criminal elements happening in the communities, while at the same time we were dealing with the conflicts between youth groups that were not in the same category of criminality by any means. So there was that level of collaboration between us and the police without any transfer of information. I mean, there were occasions, for example, when at the very beginning when we went into a community, I remember it vividly, in Mountain View, and a police car showed up, wondering if we were okay. We were inside having a meeting in a meeting room, and we said, yeah, we don't need any help, right? And they drove off, right? And later on, on the other side of the road in that same area, when the police turned up on one occasion, when we were expected, we had to abort. We had to stop the engagement we were having and go elsewhere, because it looked as though it was a setup, and that we had informed the police that we were having a meeting with these guys, which was very far from the truth. So we had to maintain a certain distance in order to keep the trust and the confidence of the community and its members. But there was no hostility. There was a level of work, each doing its own thing in its own area.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is clear to you, but
No, it is, and I'm right now, if we, just for the listeners' purposes, you have the Project Star initiative being led by private sector, but it's certainly one of those programs that you see increased participation and involvement, partnership between members of the police force and the civil society organizations across the island. So that kind of yes.
That's a much closer relationship than we ever practiced or envisaged. So
Yeah.
I'm not condemning it, but I'm just saying that it's a different situation altogether.
Yeah, but Mr. Levy, as you said that, just during the budget debate, we saw the peace management initiative coming up as one of those items. It has had its own controversy, for lack of a better word, in recent times about the results that one would have hoped. And you saw the opposition urging the Prime Minister to revisit that program, and the Prime Minister making a commitment that he would reach out to the opposition to see if that initiative can be revisited. And I know you spoke on it to the media. So I'm not sure if a last word from you on the peace management initiative as an important stepping stone in solving or dealing with violence within the communities, and the importance of that with the police.
Well, what I said to the media, because apparently I didn't actually hear it myself, but it's reported that the Prime Minister spoke out against using violence interrupters who were former criminals. And I hasten to say that this was never the case. The violence interrupters, and we would not even use that name again if we got the PMI resurrected. The violence interrupters were never former criminals by any means. They were outstanding members of the civil society, citizens who were respected in their communities, and certainly not respected because of any criminal or similar action. So I wanted to make that very, very clear. Violence interrupters were never people drawn from the criminal side of the community. So and that would, of course, obviously remain the case for any peacemakers who we were able to mobilize. And the thing is that there are many of those from the PMI days who are still around and who would love to be engaged, and therefore the interest of the opposition is welcome. Though again, PMI was something that stayed clear, very clear, of partisan connections. We were able to work in communities aligned with both sides, both political parties. And I think it may be that the Labour Party regarded us as being more partial to the PNP because it was Peter Phillips, then Minister of National Security, who established the PMI in 2002, January 2002. But we kept our distance, and the board of the PMI always had representatives of both political parties on it. So the partisan business was never in the PMI.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Levy. Last word before we leave it there.
Well, what's your last word? I'm hopeful for the future.
Right.
I believe something. I think we wait and see what the new commissioner has to say. It's early hours yet.
Yes.
He's made a good move in regard to removing woman from the name of a particular constable. So that's positive.
Yes,
And
that
I'm
was a
sure-
highlight. We should have said at the start of the program the gender neutral terms.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
So I think that's a positive step. And he's talked about community patrols. I don't know what the composition of that is yet, and how it is going to function. But anything to do with building the community and relying on the community and joining the community in collaboration with what you're doing, that's something I welcome, wholeheartedly. That was at the core of the PMI's approach.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Levy. You have a good day.
You too.
All right. That was Mr. Horace Levy, social justice advocate, and we were discussing human rights policing. We take the break and then we close out the program. All right, welcome back to Let's Start Justice. Just to wrap up, Jade, there are some other areas that we're hoping that the new police commissioner will take charge of.
Yes.
And just for our listeners, the Constabulary Force Act, it's of 1935.
Yes.
So we're saying that we need a modern policing legislation that is human rights centered, human rights focused. And I think the zones of special operations, it utilizes some human rights language in it. So it's just something that we're asking to be expanded. For example, under the ZOZO, it does make it mandatory in law.
Yes.
But there's a little language in there, subject to the availability of resources. For the police to wear the cameras, subject to the availability of resources. So the state, again, cushioned itself with that little language, yeah? That is a caveat, if you will. But the community patrols, it's something, again, that we also welcome, and it's something that we've been calling for. I think it's interesting to note, and we said it in our press statements when we are not in support of the SOEs, that technically speaking, in actuality, there is nothing preventing the JCF from deploying more members, security force members, into the communities to have that continued presence without, the big guns and feeling that is a very paramilitary, tough on crime approach, El Salvador model.
One of the things that struck me as we were talking to Mr. Levy is that if we had even started to enact some of the reforms that we've been considering, we maybe would not have gone down the road of emergency powers, because we would have increased the capacity of our police force to such an extent that maybe the pressure that we felt to enact something like Emergency Powers Act would not have been there.
And I agree, and it's several things to make mention of. I listen to the public commentary, even from those within the JCF ranks as well, and from the National Security Minister himself, who has rubbished certain things. For example, when people call for there to be that intense level of training to recruit new members, then we acknowledge that these things will take time.
Yes.
That's not to say that it isn't to be done. We're not naive to the fact that these things, it builds over time, but you must start somewhere. And there is also the conversation about, and I want to add to that media alarmist approach that police members are leaving in droves. But certainly we have to look at the compensation, the welfare of our officers.
Absolutely.
And that has to be a part of the reform process. I don't think that people who are putting their lives at risk should be in courts fighting for overtime wages. These are the things that we should be talking about, the welfare, the psychosocial support that they need. Because when you're in communities, can you imagine what you feel?
It's the quiet part of the conversation about corruption, and it's the part that we've tried to
It's not an
obfuscate.
excuse.
Yes,
but
it's not an
certainly
excuse,
it's a
but it's
reality.
certainly a contributing factor that we must consider
Yes.
and has admittedly been neglected in our considerations of reform in the past.
Well, the attorneys at JFJ, they have reason to go to lockups, but we've seen it's not just for the detainees, it's also the conditions that our officers are subjected to that we should really be looking at. So there's several things, but much to be done. But we do impress upon the National Security Minister that if it is that you make a commitment publicly about reforming the piece of legislation governing the JCF into the Police Service Act, and you put it in a throne speech, and that's why for me, if I'm even to take off my JFJ hat, I look at the throne speech, budget debates, and things a little bit differently than others. Because I don't mind if you come and say to me, as a citizen, a taxpaying citizen in this country, that this was a commitment that we made 3 years ago, and this is where we stand now. It suggests that sort of accountability.
Yes.
But as you put in the script here, Jade, from 2019 throne speech, and I'm not sure if it came up.
I
2020,
checked.
2021,
I checked
2022.
every year since. It did not come up ever again.
So, all right.
Yes.
Last week, you had something, go ahead.
Oh, I thought we were...
No, Jade, we have a few more minutes left.
Okay,
I go right up to the wire,
Please do.
But last week, just wanted to touch on something because the matter of the House Speaker went into the week. And there was a very good run through on Deon Jackson Miller's All Angles last Wednesday.
Yes.
Just to give a little bit of a background and where we're coming from with the tabling of the Auditor General's report. And I called a few attorneys just to get their views on the Section 29 versus Section 30 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act. One of the attorneys I called is a JFJ board member, Kenyatta Powell. And he said to me, Mikkel, I won't even weigh in on the sections of the legislation. Because I'm calling him as the ED, seeking advice from a board member. And he said, and I agree with him, the issue is not whether or not there is a legislative interpretation of whether the Auditor General correctly tabled or submitted the reports for tabling. The issue is whether or not the House Speaker has the power to even be reviewing another constitutional authority's tabling submission of the report, whether or not the Auditor General followed procedure. And again, this is an example of how the House Speaker arrogated responsibilities and discretionary powers onto herself that is not provided to her in the Constitution or in any statutory laws. Very troubling.
Yes.
And I want to reiterate something that we stated publicly, that this meeting that apparently will be requested of the Auditor General by the House Speaker, it's ill-advised. I don't support it. JFJ doesn't. Because even if it is not the intent or the intention of the House Speaker, it may lead one to assume that one constitutional body, authority, may be overstepping a bounds relating to the other.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And the last thing on the House Speaker issue, the letter that was made public surrounding Clerk of the House, Valerie Curtis, that was seeking to discipline her. The House Speaker said last week that she has spoken to Miss Curtis. Again, another inappropriate action.
Yes.
Because that letter having been made public,
Yes.
a public apology should have been extended
Or a
to
public
Miss Curtis.
resolution. Because
Well, actually, no, I think Miss Curtis should have sought the advice of her attorney.
Well,
The only resolution from the House Speaker, again, acting outside of the bounds of her power, was to withdraw that letter and issue a public apology.
Yes.
Again, inappropriate to be speaking to the house, to the clerk of the house, given how the matter unfolded publicly. So I do hope that this matter will be resolved, and I support the call of NIA and others that this is perhaps something that ought to be resolved with the intervention of the court.
Mm-hmm.
It's sad that we've gotten here, because I think the current administration has made too many public mishandlings with the Constitution, for lack of a better term. Yeah?
Yeah.
So that was the week that was, that I just wanted to touch on quickly. And the
Okay.
last thing, Jay,
No, I
just
have
to
two
impress
things.
upon
I have
the...
two things. First things first, on June 15th, we'll be having our art auction. For those persons who are interested in purchasing tickets, please give us a call at 755-4524 or send us an email at admin@jamaicansforjustice.org. It's a great event. It supports the organization, and you will support your local artists as well. We have a winner to our trivia question as Asaji. You won. We'll reach out to you via DM. Final word from you, Mikkel?
Yeah, just to remind our listeners that the Domestic Violence Act is under review, and if you have any comments, you can call 755-4524, so that if you're a survivor of domestic violence, we can represent you.
Feel free to WhatsApp me directly at 9199955 for those comments as well. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jade Williams.
I'm Mikkel Jackson. Have a good day.